We have another very distinguished panel. Without further ado, let's begin with Professor Appiah on my right.
Thank you very much. Like everybody else here, I'm honored and delighted to be here and enjoyed reading the manuscript very much. And I'm grateful to James Fleming for organizing this. He's very good at organizing great gatherings. So I ended up writing a paper, and I can't read it because it's too long. So I'm just going to take one sort of strand of argument out of the paper and just read it out. And we're sort of talking about the stuff to do with our responsibilities to others. Here are 5 claims of Ronnie's that I agree with in his account of duties of aid to strangers. 1, to figure out what we owe to others, we must first have an account of what we are all supposed to be up to. 2, what we should all be up to is trying to live well. 3, we need to know what it is to live well in order to decide how we should treat other people. 4, the responsibility for making a life go well belongs primarily to the person whose life it is. And 5, from this it follows that there are limits on the responsibility of others for the quality of their lives. But look, there are now nearly 7 billion others whose dignity I must respect. Many of them, at least 1 billion on any reasonable account, do not have the social and material resources to live lives of self-respect and authenticity. You cannot live a life of dignity, a life in which the central ethical facts about you are properly acknowledged, if you're scurrying from one day of subsistence to the next, uncertain where the next meal will come from for you and your family. I know this, so do you. Dworkin appears to think that settling the threshold where he does already limits our obligations to others, but it strikes me as not limiting them very much. The metaphor of swimming lanes, his own metaphor, might be invoked against him here. His view is roughly that we should normally keep out of each other's lanes. The discussion of the duty of aid suggests that I need only divert from my course if someone in another lane is drowning, and then only if I can do so without drowning myself. But suppose I could have set off in my lane with an inflatable life preserver attached to my trunks. This would slow me down and limit me in some maneuvers, but it would also mean that I could more often help the drowning without risking my own life. It would also, perhaps, add to the interest and challenge of my own swimming. Now, Dworkin does lay further constraints on our obligations. There is, for example, a constraint of scale, which, as he calls it, I do not, he says, quote, show indifference to the importance of human life when I refuse aid that would seriously threaten my own success as I've identified it. This, of course, doesn't help with the problem I'm raising, because this formulation continues to imply that the perspective of ethics permits me to ignore the needs of others pretty much in conceiving of my success. That is, it ignores the possibility I identified just now, that I ought to take account of the deep need of others in defining what it is for my life to go well. But surely, if I could take up projects that raised the probability that other people would have the materials for a life of dignity, the very perspective Ronnie identifies urges that as a consideration in taking up my responsibility to live an authentic life. And in any case, even taking this order of priorities as given, the threat to my success posed by paying more attention to some of the world's needy is hardly serious. So, but I suspect he might like this consequence, he and I should both, on his view, be doing a great deal more than we are. I mean, like it, not in the sense of being glad that he isn't doing what he ought to be doing, but like it in the sense that he admits that it would follow from his view. Our obligations are further reduced by another constraint that Ronnie suggests, which has to do with what he calls the scale of impact. The idea here is that a failure to aid only expresses a contempt for the dignity of others to the extent that it is both particularized, in the sense that it is clear exactly who it is I'm not helping, and proximate, in the sense that I am directly confronted with their need. Like Ronnie, I think that in the current state of the world, there is some reason to think that almost all of us are directly confronted with people who need help to have a chance at a life of dignity. Proximity of the relevant kind is epistemic, not geographical, and it is guaranteed by the advocacy work of Oxfam and Catholic Relief and Human Rights Watch. Just by their telling us of the existence of the people with this need, they bring us into some kind of in the relevant kind of proximity with them. This is the point that he makes. But we're not, generally speaking, however, faced with a particularized relation to most of this need, and it's very hard for Oxfam to make that true. I mean, they could send you a letter saying that here's this specific person that we need the $50 for, but that would seem artificial, and it would be artificial. Notice now that the form of the argument here grants a central place in deciding what to do to questions about the attitude I display in acting. We're asked to see a failure to intervene in certain cases as displaying, in one expression, contempt for human life, or choosing whom to help in a certain way as denying and insulting, in another expression, the gravity of the occasion. Perhaps this is, or at any rate is part of what it means for an argument for a certain normative conclusion to be interpretive. But in any case, I think this application of it invites the following objection. How can what we owe someone depend on what attitude we would display in acting towards them in a certain way? Isn't it rather that what attitude we display depends, among other things, on whether we owe them something in the first place? If I have no responsibility for helping you meet a particular need, I can't display contempt for that need when I fail to offer help. For to display contempt for a need is to fail to respect it, to fail to take it into account in the normatively appropriate way. And it's only normatively appropriate for me to meet your need, this is close to a definition of normative appropriateness, if I have a responsibility to do so. The objection in sum is that while it may be true that non-assistance sometimes does indeed display contempt for the lives of others, it does so only when we owe them something. We cannot then be guided to what we owe people by asking what acts are required if we're not to display contempt for their lives, since we can only know when we are displaying contempt for their lives if we first know what we owe them. Dworkin's view presupposes an account of what we owe. It doesn't generate one. Now, whatever you think about this objection of method, there remains to my mind some doubt as to whether Ronnie's three constraints on intervention get the moral situation right. I suggested, for example, that the constraints he formulates leave us sometimes further committed than I suspect he means us to be. So in particular, he claims that if I'm to balance the equal importance of every life with the special responsibility we have for our own, I need not offer assistance to strangers when to do so would seriously threaten my success as I have identified it, as he puts it. But, I suggested, another way to achieve the balance would be to reconceive my success in the light of the deep needs of others. That would leave us further committed than I think he believes we are. Both these possible responses start from his view of dignity, it seems to me, and I don't see how he tells us or requires us to decide to go one way rather than the other in responding to that conception. Now, Ronnie could argue that I've misunderstood the account. I'm sure he will. He says that I have a duty of assistance only when my action is required if someone else is to escape deep need. But generally, my action is not required. This is the point about particularity. What's required is action by someone or other. And one way of interpreting the particularity requirement of the impact constraint is to insist that I display contempt only when it is my inaction that is the bar to your escaping deep need. If the bar is the combined indifference of many, each of whom could help you escape, then none of them individually displays contempt for your life. The right question isn't the one that I proposed, which was, would she escape deep need if I acted, but rather, is my act required for her to escape deep need? Generally speaking, it isn't, because many other people could be doing what I'm not doing, and each of them, on Dworkin's view, is free to continue to ignore her deep need, as I am, because their action is not required. Now, we face now once more a question I left hanging. Should we be satisfied that we have acknowledged the objective importance of the life of a person in deep need, whose existence is known to us, so long as our relationship to their need is not particularized, which seems to be what Ronnie's claiming, provided in particular that there are others who could but won't help them? I don't see why the answer here should be yes. It's a fact of social psychology that the presence of others who could offer assistance reduces the probability that a person will get aid. But most people who reflect on cases, like this case, where this appears to have happened, like the Kitty Genovese case, where something like this appears to have happened, are inclined to feel not that all is well in those cases, but that something went wrong. Done?